The deep dive is about taking a stack of your sources, cutting through all the noise, and really giving you the strategic takeaways.
Right.
And today, we are analyzing a series of recent Republican electoral losses in Iowa. This is a state that for a long time has been seen as a bedrock of modern Republican dominance. And these aren't just, local news stories. Our sources are framing these defeats, especially in the special elections, not just as political setbacks, but as these really profound strategic warning signs.
I think that's the key. Warning signs about the state of the party and, frankly, about the cost of confusing identity politics with actual governance.
Yeah.
It's a deep dive into power dynamics. We're trying to apply a cold strategic lens here, the language of power, of leverage, of outcomes.
Right.
To understand what happens when a political force just stops listening to the material concerns of its own base. We're talking about real life.
Things like rent, access to hospitals.
The stress of childcare costs, exactly. So we're asking, what happens when they only listen to the echo of their own echo chamber?
Exactly. Our mission today is to understand why the numbers are, as one source puts it, screaming a warning that the Republicans seem fundamentally unwilling to hear. And maybe why this suggests a deeper refusal to adapt.
It's all about the calculus of what voters actually reward.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So to really understand the warning, you have to start with the data, the quiet but really brutal data.
These are special elections, right?
Yeah.
Which are usually different.
Completely. They're usually low turnout affairs. They favor the most motivated, the most ideological base. But the results coming out of Iowa were not polite, narrow losses. They were signal flares in the dark.
So the most stunning case, the one that comes up again and again in our sources, is State Senate District 16.
Yes.
Yeah, the Democrat Renee Hardman going up against the MAGA Republican Lucas Lofton. And before the election, that district was seen as, well, pretty winnable for the Republicans.
Winnable is putting it mildly. And the outcome was just catastrophic for them. Hardman won with an astounding 71.5% of the vote.
Wait, say that again?
71.5%? You heard that right? That's a 43-point victory margin.
43 points. I
Yeah.
mean, when you hear a number like that, your mind immediately goes to, okay, this has to be a deeply Democratic district.
That's the logical assumption.
Yeah.
But the strategic reality on the ground is so different.
How so?
Well, that district wasn't just marginal. It was a district that Donald Trump had previously won by double digits.
Wow.
So Hardman's final tally, it represents a staggering 27-point Democratic overperformance compared to past results.
Imagine being the campaign manager getting that final number. I mean, you don't call a strategy meeting at that point.
Right.
You need a diagnosis. You need to figure out why your entire operation failed to read the fundamental political terrain. It suggests the whole structure they built is just resting on sand.
And that diagnosis gets worse because it's not an isolated incident. That's the key here. Look at the pattern this year alone.
Okay.
You had Mike Zimmer flip a district that was heavily Republican, a plus 21 Donald Trump district.
I was 21.
Then Caitlin Dray flipped another state Senate seat that Donald Trump had won by 11.5 points. These are supposed to be firewall districts. They should be untouchable for the Republicans, but they're being wiped out.
So if you compile all the data for 2025 alone,
Yeah.
what's the cumulative number?
It is a deafening warning. Democrats flipped 25 Republican-held state legislative seats across the country.
25. And the Republicans?
Flipped 0.
0.
What's fascinating here is that consistency. Power does not care about slogans, it cares about outcomes, and the outcomes are consistently negative.
Yeah.
Our sources are clear on this. If accidents do not repeat themselves this consistently, then this isn't just bad luck. It's not about poor local candidates. This is a fundamental, deep-seated strategic crisis.
And a crisis that stems from a refusal to adapt.
That's it, exactly.
So that's the question, isn't it? How did such an effective political machine get so spectacularly blind to these numbers? They must have felt totally invincible.
Well, they were operating on what our sources call habit. They just believed that the formula that worked a few cycles ago, the constant combat, provoking outrage, dominating the news cycle, was an unbreakable law of politics.
And they thought they could substitute that cultural outrage for actual material improvement.
They thought symbolic battles could feed families.
But hold on, wasn't that exact strategy, the constant outrage dominating the narrative, what won them so many elections back in 2022? Why did that stop working all of a sudden?
Because, and this is the fundamental insight they missed, while controlling the narrative helps you control perception. Perception is fragile. It is not permanent.
Okay.
The most dangerous moment for any dominant political force is when yesterday's winning strategy becomes today's inflexible, unyielding habit.
They're just performing the moves of a champion long after the rules of the game have changed.
Perfectly put. And you can see that blindness so clearly when you contrast the actual approaches on the ground in Iowa.
Right. So what was Lucas Lofton, the MAGA Republican, actually talking about in District 16?
The focus was all on nationalized anger, cultural panic, the kind of stuff you see on cable news every single night, symbolic battles over national identity, and just relentless loyalty to Donald Trump.
So moral theater, trying to fire up the base with external threats.
Exactly. Now, compare that to the Democratic approach, to Renee Hardman. What was her campaign focused on to deliver that 43-point win?
Let me guess. Not cable news topics.
Not at all. Her focus, and the focus of the other successful Democrats in these flips, was entirely on kitchen table survival concerns.
Like what specifically?
Affordability, healthcare, wages, jobs, housing, childcare, and education. They were talking about whether families could afford to live in Iowa, not about what was trending on Twitter.
And this really gets to a strategic law the Republicans ignored, and it becomes painfully clear.
Which is?
Never fight battles that do not feed or protect your base. When voters are struggling to pay for groceries, for prescription drugs, they don't reward spectacle. They don't reward ideological theater.
No, they reward relief. They reward the people who show up and demonstrate that they actually understand the pain.
And this failure to connect is what the sources call the cost of contempt.
Explain that.
By focusing only on nationalized anger and external enemies, the Republicans showed contempt for the local, grinding realities of their voters' lives. The subtle message was that your struggle with healthcare costs or finding childcare was secondary.
Or worse, that suffering was somehow just inevitable.
But the Democrats delivered the precise countersignal you need to acquire power. They said, your life matters, your struggles matter, and government should help you survive them.
That's not just policy, is it? That's emotional alignment.
Exactly. It's the difference between provocation and genuine reassurance. And that alignment won them the election.
And that emotional alignment is an existential threat to the status quo. If you position yourself as the party of constant combat while ignoring the basic needs of the people you rely on, you're violating the first law of political self-preservation.
That strategic analysis leads us right to the central, yet paradoxically constraining influence on the Republicans, Donald Trump. He's still the gravitational center of the party, but our sources warn that gravity can crush just as easily as can hold things together.
It's a perfect metaphor. Because candidates like Lucas Lofton, they were losing not as independent local figures, they were losing as extensions of the MAGA identity, as extensions of Donald Trump's political brand. Right. And the strategic danger there is that the identity itself, which was once so electrifying and mobilizing, is now just becoming exhausting to voters who crave stability more than they crave spectacle.
Let's ground that. If you are running for state senate in Iowa District 16, your job should be to talk about local road funding, property taxes.
The closure of the nearest rural hospital.
Exactly. But if you're a candidate defined entirely by that MAGA identity, you are constantly forced to comment on Mar-a-Lago, on national legal battles, on cultural flashpoints happening hundreds of miles away.
And that is the strategic cost of overexposure. When a symbol becomes unavoidable, turning every single contest, no matter how local, into a national loyalty test, while the brand becomes vulnerable.
It's impossible to have a successful conversation about water quality or hospital funding if every answer has to be filtered through the lens of loyalty to Donald Trump first.
The brand just stops speaking to the daily lives of local voters.
This raises an important question. In the language of power, when your strongest weapon prevents you from adapting to local conditions, it becomes a chain.
Yes, you're strategically constrained.
It's no longer a weapon.
Exactly. The identity Donald Trump built prevents the strategic evolution that's needed for survival. Any adjustment like running on local hospital retention instead of the national culture wars is seen as betrayal. It's seen as weakness within the party.
You can't pivot. The identity punishes independent thought.
Precisely. And we see this play out in what our sources call the trap of permanent war.
The constant emotional siege.
Yes. Framing every single issue as an existential emergency was, for a time, incredibly mobilizing. But the sources note that fear, when you overuse it, just becomes background noise. The audience goes numb.
People can endure hardship, but they can't live forever in a state of emotional, political siege. It's just exhausting.
It is. And Iowa voters in these special elections chose relief over rage. They changed the candidates who focused on competence and tangible deliverables over those who focused on enemies and constant cultural grievance.
So let's look at the arithmetic of decline. This is where the long-term danger really lies for them. Some Republicans seem to be taking this false comfort in their institutional control.
Sure, they still control state legislatures, the courts, that gives them structural power. But our sources explain why this is a historical trap. Institutional control without emotional legitimacy is fundamentally brittle.
It holds up until the moment it doesn't.
Right. The appearance of strength, relying on maps and rules, has to be constantly reinforced by genuine public support. And Iowa exposed that imbalance. They're relying on structured gerrymandered districts, judicial appointments, not on the consent and, dare I say, the affection of the governed.
And we have to remember the context here. These consistent double-digit overperformances are happening in special elections.
Which, again, should favor their most disciplined base.
Right. Consistent overperformance like that isn't luck, it's momentum. And momentum is the one currency in politics you absolutely cannot fake.
And that momentum points directly to what the sources call the Democrats' quiet advantage, the blueprint the Republicans just ignored.
So what was the core of that slow power strategy? Because it's often hard to see the national story in local organizing.
It was relentless human-scale engagement. This wasn't about flashy rallies or big TV ads. It was about focused door-knocking, making sure every candidate looked like they understood their community's pain.
And focusing on practical promises.
Entirely practical promises. For instance, Hardman's campaign didn't talk abstractly about healthcare. They talked about stopping rural hospital closures and limiting the price of prescription drugs for seniors. Tangible things.
Oh, they promised competence and effort, not revolutions. It sounds incredibly old school, almost boring compared to the constant spectacle on the other side.
Exactly. They ran campaigns focused on being good government, not on being great television. And that slow, consistent process of local connection and tangible relief is how you rebuild power from the ground up.
So what does this all mean? The Republicans are choosing to rely on nationalized anger, while the Democrats are rebuilding power from the ground up through local connection.
It means the Republicans are facing a critical choice. They either have to adapt quietly, which means refocusing on material conditions, lowering the volume on the culture war, and loosening Donald Trump's gravitational grip on every local race, or they double down loudly. They feed the identity, they punish dissent, they nationalize every contest even further. And history suggests that's often the easier but ultimately fatal path for a power structure that's become ossified.
Power just can't survive on a shrinking circle of loyalty forever.
It can't.
So the losses in Iowa, then, were not flukes. They weren't statistical anomalies. They were symptoms of this profound strategic shift in the electorate.
A shift away from fear-based politics.
And towards survival-based practical governance.
And we really have to reiterate the central point that the analysis brings forward. The Republicans are losing not because they are hated, but because they are no longer needed in the way they once were.
They replaced reassurance and solutions with provocation and distraction.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the most dangerous realization any power can face. Once people discover they can function, that they can succeed without your identity, without your involvement.
They begin to imagine a future without you entirely.
And when that imagination spreads, no slogan and no amount of spectacle can stop it.
So the Republican crisis is less about the strength of their opposition and is far more about the consequences of confusing dominance relying on structure and habit with actual relevance, with delivering tangible results.
Well said.
Which leaves a final thought for you to consider. What strategies, applied to your own work or your own organization, might you be relying on purely out of habit, rather than demonstrated effectiveness, simply because they used to work? We'll leave you with that to consider. Thanks for diving in.